As the saying goes, the draft starts in Mobile with the Senior Bowl. And as always, the Seahawks prioritize Senior Bowl prospects in the 2024 NFL Draft. We'll be chatting with Senior Bowl director Jim Nagy on each and every one of Seattle's draft picks, Sam Howell, and much more in a jam-packed Wednesday episode.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in, whether you're in nearby Redmond, Washington, or down in Jim Nagy's neck of the woods in Mobile, Alabama. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. As I've already kind of introduced here, glad to bring back a friend of the show. We have him on every year. Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, as well as former NFL scout with the Patriots and the Seahawks. Jim, as always, greatly appreciate having you on the show with us. And hopefully it's not getting too sticky and hot down there in Mobile just yet.
No, it is. It is. Good to be back on. But yeah, it is pretty swampy outside right now, so it's good to be in here doing this with you guys. I'm sorry it's taken it's been like a month since the draft, so sorry it's taken this long.
Oh, you're good. We're just happy to have the opportunity to be able to speak with you about Seattle's latest class. And first off, congratulations on another record-breaking year for Senior Bowl prospects getting drafted in the NFL draft. And one of the big culprits for that, of course, John Schneider and the Seahawks, 6 of their 8 selections being players that were in Mobile for this year's Senior Bowl. Looking at this from a non-biased lens, I know that's got to be very difficult considering you used to work for the Seahawks, but what does it mean to you, Jim, that John Schneider and the front office continue to put such a priority on picking players from the Senior Bowl?
Man, it's cool. Those guys are all my guys. I just was with John in Nashville a couple weeks ago for a long weekend for something. It's great to see him. I miss those guys. But no, I guess it just shows we value a lot of the same stuff in players, right? And again, going back to, I know it's a new regime up there now with Coach Carroll gone, but the old mantra, always compete, right? The guys that come to Mobile aren't afraid to compete. I'll say that. There was a lot of guys in this. There's not a lot, but there was a handful of guys in this draft that ended up being 3rd, 4th, 5th round draft picks that were invited here to play in the game, and they listened to the wrong people. They didn't want to come down and compete, and I think they hurt themselves for it. So again, it's really cool. And again, like I don't watch a ton of NFL anymore. Don't have a lot of time, especially like the tape stuff. But if I'm home on a Sunday and we got the TV on, it's always Seahawks. So. It's more of our guys to watch on the Hawks. It's good. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and as Corbin said, Jim, thank you so much for joining us yet again. And you actually kind of just led into my first question. Your experience as the executive director of the Senior Bowl, but previously working as a scout for several different clubs, the Seahawks, the Patriots, the Chiefs, the Commanders, I guess I'm curious about your thoughts, taking a kind of a deep look at Pete Carroll and just his legacy in terms of what he brought to the Seattle Seahawks, what he brought to the NFL, and his experience, of course, back at USC as well.
Yeah, he's a legend. He's a legend. He should be in that Ring of Honor quickly there. On paper, what is it, the stat? 3 guys have done the Super Bowl in a college college football championship, and he's one of the 3. That's pretty incredible right there on the resume. But just, what he did in LA, just not with just the program, but doing a lot of transformational stuff in the community. He did a lot of stuff in the community up there in Seattle too. So a lot of coaches don't do that. Let's be real. I mean, a lot of guys get locked into a team and they coach their football team and they go home. And I think, Pete's legacy will be that he won championships on the field and he impacted his communities. So, I owe a lot to him. I learned a lot from him as a leader and how he was around that building. I don't know where I would be in this role if I wasn't around John and Pete for the 5 years I was up there. I mean, they really, I took a lot from my time up there, and Pete was great. It's going to be different seeing that sideline this year without him on it and chewing his gum and smiling and having a good time out there. I mean, I used to love just watching him enjoy coaching ball. But yeah, he's a legend, man. No other way to say it.
This new coaching staff, Jim, that's replacing Pete Carroll, and the only holdover is Carl Scott. The entire rest of the staff is gone, but there's a lot of college flavor in this coaching staff. You've got Mike Macdonald, who was at Michigan a couple of years ago, and then Ryan Grubb, obviously the dynamic offenses at Washington. Jay Harbaugh being the special teams coach at Michigan. There's a lot of college flavor with this new coaching staff. What did you hear about these coaches over the last several years and where they fit in with Seattle? And how does this group compare and contrast to what Pete Carroll and what his staff did over the years in Seattle?
Wow. That's a hard one, Corbin. Honestly, like I know some of these guys. I know Jay Harbaugh a little bit. I know Mike Macdonald a little bit. I went up and played in Jim Harbaugh's golf tournament a couple summers ago. Being a Michigan alum, they were nice enough to have me up there for that, and had a bus ride to and from Ann Arbor with the coaches that year, and got to know Mike a little bit that day. Ryan Grubb, I don't know at all. So, what I would say is it's gonna look and feel different, and Hawks fans have to kind of adjust to that. And there's less familiarity on that staff. I mean, Pete always surrounded himself with guys he was comfortable with, as most coaches do. It makes sense from a chemistry standpoint. I mean, we always talk about like locker room chemistry and why that's important, but you also need chemistry on your coaching staff. So, we'll see how that comes together. But I just love there was kind of, Mike's openness to kind of reach out and go outside of, his tree and who he was familiar with to assemble the staff. So, again, it's all new and that's a lot of fun and everything. And we'll see what happens once they get into it, once they get into the battles in the fall. But, I'm sure in the building, I've heard comments from some of the players. There's like a new energy up there. I saw all the talk about, they took pictures down from the Legion of Boom era and all the stir that created up there and all that. And I get it. I get why they did some of the things they did. But to me, it's just an exciting time. I mean, that era will never be duplicated. The LOB teams, Pete Carroll. I mean, that will be, for a lot of people. Hopefully this next group will carry on and do great things as well. But for a lot of people, that will be, the glory days of Seattle Seahawks football. So just a new time, man. New time. I wish I had a better answer for you. I just don't know. I don't know a lot of those coaches intimately.
Well, I still think that it was a kind of just a fascinating viewpoint from your perspective as far as, working a little bit with Mike Macdonald. And I think that golf trip sounds like a lot of fun back in Ann Arbor. So I'm definitely jealous about that. Jim, before we get into the specifics of the different players that the Seahawks drafted that participated in Mobile at your game, the Senior Bowl, can you just take like a broad overview? What did you think? If I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to assign a grade to the Seahawks draft per se, but really, was there any obvious difference in focus, you think, from the Seahawks in how they drafted this class, or just what did you think about Seattle's kind of focus along the line of scrimmage, for example, or the lack of selecting a quarterback? Is there anything that really stood out to you as far as Seattle's 2024 draft class?
Well, Rob, I'm not assigning a grade, man. I'm not going to do that. No, things that stuck out. I mean, the quarterback thing, that didn't surprise me because I know they like Sam Howell. To me, that was a great trade. I actually played golf with Sam and Drake May this spring after the Senior Bowl. They were both training down here in Mobile. We played golf one day, and at the time, I didn't realize those two guys, grew up going to this QB country together in Charlotte for forever. And they almost had a chance to be teammates if Sam would have stayed in Washington and Washington picked Drake May. Those guys were kind of excited to be teammates. But so I wasn't shocked about that. I feel like they took best player. They didn't reach. And I'll say this, I feel like they've done a really good job the last couple of years. Going back to my time there, I felt like there were times where we reached for need. And it came back to bite us. So I think they've done a really good job of kind of sticking to the board and taking the best player. And again, I know we'll probably get into pick by pick stuff, but like the back-to-back Auburn corners, right? I doubt that was the plan, was to, pick 2 corners on day 3. But when you've got 2 guys, two guys with probably, I know we had 3rd round grades on DJ James, at some points over his career. So when you got 2 guys kind of sticking out on your board, you take them. There weren't any real surprises. The Byron Murphy thing, I thought was a great pick. As last year with Witherspoon, they're just taking the best defensive player there on the board for him. So no real surprises, man. I wish I had something more for you, but I did like the fact that I don't feel like they didn't reach for a need.
This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Will Connor McDavid scored at least 2 goals as the Oilers try to even the score against the Stars in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals? Is Fernando Tatis Jr. going to break out of his slump with a home run against the Miami Marlins? And can Anthony Edwards keep things rolling with 20 or more points as the Timberwolves try to stave off elimination against the Mavericks in Game 5? You can bet on all of this and more on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It feels like John Schneider during the first round. I don't know if anybody was doing a happy dance more than John Schneider was, seeing Byron Murphy II fall to the Seahawks' lap at pick number 16, their highest graded player. And obviously, he was not at the Senior Bowl, but you have watched a ton of Texas games. That's a program that ascended back to the college football playoff. When you look at Byron Murphy II and what he brings to the table, where do you see him fitting early on in Seattle? And this is the big question. What is the ceiling for this kid? Because there seems to be varying evaluations on that. But what do you see the ceiling being for Byron Murphy II in Seattle?
Yeah, Corbin, you're bringing up a terribly sore subject, man. We did have Byron Murphy committed to play in the Senior Bowl until about a week before, and Daniel Jeremiah put out his mock first-round draft, and he had Taliesin Fuaga going like 11 and Byron Murphy 12. So I text DJ. I'm like, man, what are you doing? You're killing me right now. I'm going to lose both of these players, I promise you, before the day's out. And he texted back. He's like, no, don't say that. And then an hour later, Ron Slavin, Byron Murphy's agent, calls. He's like, man, I can't send him. Like, he's going to go too high. And I'll say this, you know how most general managers and head coaches say they got their guy, right? Oh, this guy's the highest guy on our board. And I heard, Corbin, you just said it, like he was their highest graded player. When Ron Slavin called me that day, he's like, Jim, Byron's not getting past 16 in Seattle. So he maybe knew their board better than anybody, but no, I'm happy for Seattle. I'm happy for Byron. I'm just joking. He's a really good player. And we did end up with Fuaga, by the way. But Byron's a great player, man. He's one of my favorite players in the draft. We would have loved to have he and Tavondre Sweat here together. I just thought that would have been fun to have both those guys in Mobile at the same time. But I've said all along, I stay away from the player comp thing. I feel like that's really overdone in the media. And Rob, I'm not throwing stones, buddy, but I know the guys you work for in the media ask you to do the player comp thing. We don't do it as much in the NFL. But the guy that he reminded me a lot of was Grady Jarrett coming out of Clemson. And I want to say I was scouting for the Hawks when Grady came out, I think. And he was one of my favorite players in that draft. He ended up going in the 5th round. And I think over time we've learned. I mean, when you get to players that are maybe a little undersized and don't have the measurable stuff, you got to sit back and be like, well, who does he remind you of? Well, Grady Jarrett. Well, in hindsight, Grady Jarrett should have been a mid first round pick and not a 5th round pick. He's going to be in the Falcons Ring of Honor someday, and he's one of the best players in franchise history. So if that's the player he reminds you of, my gosh, like if you guys can get a career close to what Grady Jarrett's been for the Atlanta Falcons up there in Seattle, that's a hell of a pick. So, but active, explosive, just a really fun player to watch, man. I mean, that's the highest compliment I can give any player when I talk to him. Like, especially when I was scouting, I'd be like, man, you're one of the funnest players I saw play this year. And that's Byron. I mean, he's violent with his hands, heavy with his hands, active, never stops, quick off the ball. Like, you just notice him. He just shows up. So, and that's what was so much fun about watching Texas tape today, this year. It was Tavondre was this big, massive, powerful, hard to move, impossible to move human being. And then you had Byron next to him, just, active and all over the place. And they just kind of played off each other. So that was a fun duo to watch. But Seattle, he's going to bring a lot to that front. They needed a guy like that. And like you said, he fell to him, and they were fortunate he fell that far.
Yeah, Jim, as you mentioned, Byron Murphy is going to be a really exciting addition to Seattle's defensive line, but offensive line has been the biggest area of concern for me, at least for a long time. And, I'm not going to kiss the Michigan ring too much here, but the most dominant offensive lineman that I've ever seen at the Senior Bowl, and I'm dating myself here, going back 25 years almost, but was a Steve Hutchinson. And I'm not going to be making any comparisons between Christian Haynes and Steve Hutchinson. But at the same time, some of the folks that were at your game this past season, when I was sending some texts and asking about some of the offensive linemen who were really turning heads, Christian Haynes was the guy that everybody seemed like they were talking about, bragging about, along with Taliesin Fuaga, as you mentioned before. Is there any, what about Christian Haynes really stood out to you? Because, kind of like you mentioned with Grady Jarrett, of course, a little bit shorter, but he played at Clemson. How is a player coming from UConn going to be able to make that adjustment to the NFL in your mind with Christian Haynes?
Well, first of all, Rob, you bring up Hutch, and that's opens up a cool door. Hutch was on our 75th anniversary team down here this year, so he took part of the festivities that we had. And they're lucky to have Hutch as part of that scouting department now, man. That is an unbelievable resource for them. Not all players are great scouts. But just talking to a lineman over the years with Hutch, he knows exactly what he's looking at. He's really dialed into the makeup of these players. Again, when you get a Steve Hutchinson come into your school, you're not going to treat him like every other scout on the road, right? It's just not. I'm surprised more teams haven't done that with legendary players, because, these schools roll out the red carpet for Hutch when he goes in. So, not only does he get, watch the guy at practice and watch tape like all the other scouts, I'm sure he sits there for however long as he wants to sit there and watch tape and talk football with him. So, it's a great resource for John. I think it's a really underrated, smart move of the Seahawks to have Hutch a part of that front office. And I know he liked Christian Haynes, man. He was fired up after the draft. After those three guys, I texted him, and he was excited about all the offensive linemen they took. But back to Christian, sorry, long-windedly. But no, Christian was, to me, I thought he was like the best zone scheme guard in the draft. Really initial quickness, lateral mobility, second level stuff was really, really good. Really, again, fun to watch. When the guys are really good at something, it's fun to watch on tape. He reminded me a little bit of, we drafted Rodney Hudson when I was in Kansas City, similar body type. The measurables are almost exact. But the key thing is they both played bigger than they are. And they both had reach. They both had longer arms for their body type. So, Christian played some center down here. He didn't do that at all on UConn tape. He was a left guard only. I think all 50 some career starts came at was he a left guard or right guard? Right guard. Yeah, it's right guard. So he can do some center stuff. He did it here, and he looked pretty good doing it. So I wouldn't rule that out down the line. But to me, you got a year one starter. You got a guy that's good. I know they're going to say it's competition, and I get that. But there is no reason watching this guy over the last 2 years that he's not starting week one for Seattle. So I think you got a long-term high-end starter. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy goes to Pro Bowls.
Going to the opposite end of the spectrum, because I think Christian Haynes, you can make an argument, non-quarterback, was as polished of a player coming into this draft as you're going to find at any position group, with all the snaps he had at right guard at UConn, a couple All-American selections. Then you have Tyrese Knight, who really came on the draft radar late in the process, really gaudy numbers, 140 tackles last year. And Jim, watching the tape, watching several UTEP games, there's so many splash plays that jump out from this kid. Gets to be in the Senior Bowl, I believe, as a late addition, based on what I've read, late addition to your Senior Bowl roster. How much did that impact his value going into this pre-draft process? And do you see similarities here with Mike Macdonald bringing in Tyrese Knight to what Pete Carroll used to do with the long athletic corners, because we know the linebacker coaching background there for Mike Macdonald.
Yeah, Tyrese is a guy that he's the value of going to games live, guys. I mean, I didn't know much about Tyrese going into the year, but they played a week 0 game against Jacksonville State here in the state of Alabama. Now, it's still a good drive. It was a 10-hour plus round trip drive for me that Saturday. It was a long day, but that's a lot easier trip than El Paso, Texas for us. So I drove up there, and I was going up there to see a quarterback that UTEP had, really, and saw Dana Dimmel on the field before the game, their head coach at UTEP, and just talking him up. And Dana used to coach at Kansas State, and he's like, take a look at my linebacker. This Knight kid, he's the best one I've coached since Mark Semino. I don't know if you guys remember the name Mark Semino, but Mark Semino, guy had a really good NFL career. So I said, really, Semino? He's like, yeah, Jim, he's got all the same stuff, makeup wise that Mark had. He can really run. And so I'm like, cool, I'll check him out. So that was, he put him on the radar week 0, and we followed him through. I think I put out a thread on Tyrese. I do that in the fall. I'll put out video threads on guys, and I don't know when it was, October, November, or whatever. He can really close. He's instinctive, and he can run, which is 2 really good places to start it for a linebacker. And again, he was kind of a late ad because of the junior thing this year. It was hard for us this year being the first year with the juniors. We had to reserve roster spots, right? You can't just invite the juniors until they declare. That's what the league doesn't want us just inviting juniors, and I don't want to piss off college coaches by inviting underclassmen without them declaring first. So he wouldn't have been a late ad in other years. He would have been a guy we invited right out of the chute. But there were some junior backers that we were kind of on, and then we had a couple guys fall out late. Jalen Ford from Texas, Tyron Hopper from Missouri, guys that were committed. But yeah, I mean, that's no reflection on what we thought of Tyrese. I mean, if I post stuff in the fall about especially a video thread about a player, read between the lines. We like the player. We're not just posting that for the fans. That's recruiting. And we wanted Tyrese Knight to see that. So yeah, man, I mean, they've done a great job in Baltimore over the years with linebackers. And again, I mean, I think the Seahawks are excited about a guy that has really good eyes, and he can run and get to the football. So, and he did some nice things in coverage down here during Senior Bowl week, which, you didn't always see on tape. You don't see these guys in a lot of man coverage, very few college linebackers. So, yeah, I think they got a good one. I think they got a guy that's going to challenge right away for playing time.
Jim, I just love hearing your perspective. Of course, we're talking to Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, and I'm going to ask you to kind of go back in time for a couple of years. I know that because of all the duties that you have, you aren't just sitting there in the stands and evaluating. But with quarterbacks, I suspect that you do have a little bit more of a relationship built up, and maybe get a little bit more feedback. I'm going to ask you to go back and just let us know what you remember of Sam Howell back when he was North Carolina before, of course, he was drafted by Washington. I saw a quarterback that had all of the physical ability that I was looking for in terms of accuracy, arm strength, mobility. I'm curious maybe what you saw, what you heard as far as, is he the type of leader that the Seahawks might be looking for to be that long-term quarterback of the future if Geno Smith is not?
Yeah. So going back on Sam, we got him as a junior. He was a junior graduate. So we had him that year. His sophomore year was his big year. He had a lot of NFL skill talent around him. I know we had Michael Carter in our game, one of his running backs. He had his other running back is the guy that's at Denver now, as a high draft pick. He had a couple NFL receivers. So he had a lot around him his sophomore year. And threw the heck out of it, right? And then he comes back his junior year, all those guys leave. And what you saw was Sam Howell, the runner. You saw the guy that was super tough and was almost like a fullback playing the position, really out of necessity. Didn't have a lot up front, didn't play with a lot up front any of his time there, really. And now you fast forward and you've seen what he's done in the National Football League, and he's just seeing him this spring. I lose track of the NFL stuff, and he was only what he started every game for the Commanders last year, right? Didn't he start all 17?
Yep.
And I asked him, I said, who's your offensive line? and he rattled off his 5 starters. And I was like, you got to be kidding. How'd you play 17 games behind that line? Not to throw stones at any of those guys in it, but I mean, it was a cast of, there were some names that there was a couple guys on the line. I'm like, man, I haven't even heard of that guy. So that's what he did last year. And I know at one point in the year, like middle of the season, week 11, week 12, he's leading the league in passing. So this guy's done a lot, man. And I'll say from a leadership perspective, leadership comes in a lot of different packages, as we all know, right? I think Sam's a quieter guy by nature. Like, I think I first met him at the Manning camp, and then, he's tied in with the QB country, David Morris, who runs that out of here in Mobile. I've been around Sam a lot, but he kind of keeps to himself. You guys probably got a feel about that right now. Since he's been up there, he's not, a huge extrovert, but he leads through his toughness, man. Like the dude is tough as nails. And I know when they traded for him, kind of what John was saying, I'll echo that. I mean, this guy is just super tough and rugged guy, and kind of a throwback. I think, there's been a lot of quarterbacks over time that have led that way, that have been that guy, that gritty blue collar. Like Jim McMahon was kind of, although Jim was a huge extrovert, around his teammates and played with a lot of emotion, when he really led through his toughness. Jim McMahon was tough as nails. So if he's the guy, if he wins the job, I think that'll be his leadership. And just taking it back to my Patriots experience, when I got there, Tom Brady was going into year 3. He just won the Super Bowl. So I got there in 2002, and Tom wasn't the Tom Brady that we saw at the end of his career. He was very quiet. All our alpha leaders were on defense. Willie McGinnis, Rodney Harrison, Teddy Bruschi, like that side of the ball had all those guys. And I just remember one day at practice and training camp, my first year there, you had Laura Malloy and Ty Law chirping at Tom. And Tom just kind of took it. And I remember pulling Scott Pioli, our GM, aside. I'm like, is this a situation where you'll step in and say something to those veteran DBs? And he's like, no, man, Tom's got to learn to take this thing on his own. I only share that story in the sense that Tom Brady became the leader of that football team because he was the toughest dude on the team. He worked harder than everybody, and he was the smartest guy in the building. So, like, in the locker room, I should say, maybe not smarter than Coach Belichick, but you can lead in different forms. And early in Tom's career, that's how he led. There's a reel right now I've seen recently going around on social media, like the hits that Tom Brady took. Like, that's what gets lost, is how tough Tom was. So, going back to the question about Sam's leadership, I think he's going to lead. He's a rugged blue collar guy.
You mentioned earlier DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett, the 2 Auburn corners that both participated in the Senior Bowl. And it is rare to see a team draft 2 of the same players from the same position group as the Seahawks did, selecting both those players, especially after picking Devin Witherspoon last year. Just how surprised were you to see the Seahawks double dip, not only at quarterback, but bringing in 2 players from the same school that you had a chance to have audition at the Senior Bowl? And where do you see these guys from a value perspective fitting in long-term for the Seahawks?
Yeah, not just the same school, the same area. I mean, DJ James is from here in Mobile, and Nehemiah Pritchett's from 40 minutes up the road in Jackson. So, these guys know each other going back. DJ, we do a thing every year down here we started it when I got here, called the Future Prospect Team. And it's all like our local high school guys that get Division I offers. And DJ was part of that. So I've been following DJ for a long time. They're different players. So it's cool to see. It was very cool to see. Happy for those guys. I know they're tight. I had them down here in the Senior Bowl together with Jalen Simpson, their free safety. We had 3 Auburn DBs in the game. But they're close, but they're different. They're different. So Nehemiah is more outside only. I don't see Nehemiah playing in the slot at all. He's more of an outside, typical, kind of your prototype Seahawks corner, 6 foot plus. High 4.3s, can open and run. I think where he made the biggest leap this year was finding the football and playing the football. I think that was a question mark that at least I had in the past. And it showed up during Senior Bowl week too. Like going back through the practice tape, I'm like, man, why aren't the media talking more about Nehemiah Pritchett this week after I watched it? Because guy got his hands on a lot of football. So I think he made a nice jump that way this year. Whereas DJ can play inside and outside, I think he's a better fit inside. He's got really good short area quickness and trigger, but he can play outside too because he can really run. DJ's thing is when he's focused and dialed in, man, this dude can cover anybody. He's got really good man cover skills. I think that, he's got to focus in and to take the next step. And I've talked to him about this, is just like really staying dialed in throughout the play. Because when he's locked in, he's a really good player, man. And he's a guy that over time, again, we share grades with a lot of NFL teams. That's part of our process. And we offered both these guys a year ago. They were invited to the 2023 Senior Bowl. And they both opted to go back. They were like, these are two guys that took NIL money and went back to school. And there were teams that had 3rd round grades on DJ James, and most teams had 4th round grades on Nehemiah Pritchett. So to get those guys really like a round or two later than the rest of the league had them valued, I mean, that's really good value. You're not reaching, you're just letting the board come to you. And when they're sticking out like a sore thumb, like a grade or two higher than everyone else on your board, then that's who you take. So they got 2 make-it players, man. I think both those guys could be at worst 3rd corners. If they pan out, maybe start. But I mean, you're talking about at worst like 3rd or 4th corners that on day 3, that's really good value. But that's what I saw them talent-wise, guys that could be 3rd or 4th corners.
Well, and I'm curious if you saw similar value with Seattle's next pick, Satoa Lauamea. As you just said, Jim, I mean, you see the boards of lots of different clubs. I was stunned that Lauamea was still available to Seattle deep into day 3. I just see a guy that had demonstrated his versatility and his consistency at Utah. And of course, like Auburn, Utah is well known for sending guys into the league. What did you see from Lauamea? What allowed you to convince you to bring him in to Mobile for the Senior Bowl in the first place?
Yeah, he was an easy invite. I thought he had a chance to go 3rd or 4th round when we invited him here. That's kind of what I saw him as. I saw him as a guy that could start. I thought he made some stuff look really easy this year, especially at the 2nd level. Thought he could play both guard and tackle. Really would love to see him inside at guard more. Even though he played more tackle. I was kind of sitting on a couple linemen there. I've got so many players that have good weeks, and you want to promote these guys when you're in my position. At least that's what I feel like I should do in my position for these guys to come to Mobile and play well. I felt like the linemen that weren't getting talked about in the media were Isaiah Adams, who I put something out like 3 days before the draft, and he went in the 3rd round to Arizona. And Dom Pooney from Kansas, and I think Dom went in the 3rd as well. And Lamea was in that group for me too. Like, you didn't hear anything about this guy, so I was surprised where they got him. Again, for a guy that I think that I saw starter upside with. That's what they get. They take him 5th or 6th.
6th round.
6th.
Yeah, I mean, to get a guy that, again, not that I'm always right, but I mean, I saw a guy that could start in the league. So you got a guy that could start in the league in the 6th round. You've certainly immediately upgraded your competition. I mean, if that's the goal is to get a bunch of guys in there and let them battle it out and see who wins. I mean, this guy should be part of that competition.
We saw a very rare thing happen in the Seahawks draft room later in the 6th round last month, Jim. I can't remember the last time that the Seahawks picked somebody that Rob did not know, but that happened. Michael Jarrell from Findlay getting selected, and even Rob was like, who? That is something you don't hear happen often, but this is a guy based on some conversations I've had. Pro scouts have been following him for a couple of years at the Division II level, and I'm curious from your perspective, you guys have had some lower level players at the Senior Bowl in the past. Is Michael Jarrell a player that was at all on the Senior Bowl radar? I know that he played in the Hulu Bowl ultimately, but was he somebody that was at least a known commodity for you guys at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, and I'm surprised Rob didn't know. You're right. Rob's great. If you slide one by Rob, that doesn't happen very often. But nice thing, yeah, we've got evidence too. He was part of. We do a thing in the summers. We'll do it this Saturday for the first time. June and July, we do small school Saturdays, and Michael Jarrell was part of one of those posts last summer. So if you just search hashtag small school Saturdays, I don't know what week it was, but he was part of it. So yeah, we watched him come into the year. We watched him during the fall. Great job by the Hula Bowl, getting him there. That's great. I mean, for them to get players drafted, that's all. They did a great job. The Hula Bowl did a great job this year, by the way. Shout out to those guys. But yeah, so he was on the radar, and just talking to the guys in Seattle, I was like, man, should we have invited this guy? And they're like he just had a really good process. After the Hula Bowl, he had a good pro day, and did a good job at interviews and all that. And they were probably glad we didn't bring him to Mobile, because then more people would have known about him. But no, that's you're not going to make Rob. Rob's not going to miss very often on a name.
Well, that's so kind of you, Jim, and Corbin as well. Thank you both. I want to kind of switch this for a second and kind of give you, Jim, an opportunity to kind of, pat yourself on the back or, and call your shot a little bit. The last couple of years, you've been kind enough to join us, and you've called out guys like Jay Curran or Jake Bobo, guys that have actually made Seattle's roster and made contributions as rookies. Is there anybody of this draft class or the undrafted free agents that, that you really have a strong conviction that you think that this is going to be a future NFL guy that, especially the undrafted free agents, the guys that we haven't talked about much, that you are especially intrigued by their fit in Seattle?
Well, you got two of our guys. Nelson Caesar from Houston, kind of an edge rusher, DPR, good sack production there at Houston. I think why he didn't get drafted, just teams couldn't figure out what he was. Positionally. So no, that's the great thing. You get him as a free agent, you figure it out without spending draft capital. But certainly a good enough player. Again, we don't invite anyone to the Senior Bowl we don't think are going to get drafted and make a team. Like that's just and again, we don't do it without speaking to over half the league and comparing grades. And I mean, the league wanted Nelson Caesar in the Senior Bowl. I mean, they saw him as a guy that was a draftable level player that could make a football team. So, it wasn't just us. I mean, the rest of the league kind of thought the same thing too. So I don't know if it was, position fit because of the tweener measurables, like figuring out what he is. Again, sometimes I lose track of how these guys test at pro day and combine. Maybe sometimes that's not great. And then the other stuff we don't know is like the mental part, how they learn. Like we don't have the resources to figure that out. So I don't know, but he'll have a chance because of the pass rush. And I think the emphasis on the special teams with the new kickoff rules will help a guy like Nelson, the corner from Fresno, Carlton Johnson, yep. Another guy. Like I can't believe more people weren't talking about this guy during Senior Bowl week, because if we charted PBUs through the week, he might have had the most PBUs of any corner down here that week. Super fast, obviously the second fastest guy we've ever had in the Senior Bowl. Behind Tariq Woolen on our GPS stuff, so the guy can legit fly. He didn't have a great workout at Fresno outside of the 40. Some of the change of direction stuff wasn't great on paper, which surprised me because you put on the tape, he didn't look like a straight line corner when you did him on tape. So, and I know they like Carlton in the fall, so we'll see. I'm glad they ended up with him because I know that a couple of their scouts on the staff really like Carlton. So those would be, and then they got Westover from Washington, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that would be another guy. We like Jake. We're in really close communication with his agents. Leading up to Senior Bowl, had we lost another tight end leading up to it, because we did lose one. We lost McLaughlin from Arizona. If we would have lost another, Jake would have been on a plane. We would have had him here. So good football player, man. Kind of jack of all trades, H-back type player. You guys know him. I think he can play some fullback, and they'll be able to move him around. Special teams now will help him now that that's more of an emphasis on that. 2 more phases in the kicking game. So, but we like Westover. To me, was like a really unsung guy on that UW team.
Wish he could have been in the Senior Bowl, because that would have been the first player that I ever coached that got to go to Mobile. But anyway,
oh, that's cool.
I digress.
You should have called me on it, man. You should have called me.
Anyway, Jim, as always, we greatly appreciate having you on the show every year, given your time and the insight. But I'm going to put you on the spot here just a little bit to wrap things up. And, maybe you'll view this as a situation where you have to thread the needle. And, maybe that's being viewed as a little easier than what the terminology is on social media. Jaguars practice the other day. But anyway, are the Seahawks a playoff team in 2024? Do you think that they are going to get back to the postseason year one with Mike Macdonald, or is this going to be more of a long-term process to get back to playing January football?
Are you asking me to thread the needle with routes on air? I think I can do that. No, it's going to be. I will say yes, and I'm just going to lean into something John said after the season. He felt like they underachieved, and from the outside looking out, I kind of felt that too. Because, when I see them play teams like the LA Rams and they show who the Rams starting defense was, and there was about 5 or 6 guys on that defense that, were like undrafted free agent level players. And,
yeah.
I think the Rams coaching staff is unbelievable. I think Sean McVay is one of the best head coaches in the league. But they've got a good roster, man. You look up and down that roster, there's not many holes. And then you had guys like Byron Murphy and Christian Haynes and guys that can plug right in. I think they need to get good quarterback play. Like Gino, if Gino can get back to what he was a couple years ago, or Sam beats him out, it'll be interesting to see if that's a true competition or not. But I certainly feel like they have the personnel. Like, I'm excited to see what Derek Hall looks like in year 2. I mean, there's some, like Baltimore's gotten a lot of run out of dudes like Derek Hall. So there's some guys in year 2, the second, third year players I think are still ascending. So yeah, if you're asking me to thread the needle, I'll say yes, they're going back to the playoffs this year.
We greatly appreciate it, Jim, as always, all the insight on draft prospects. And we're going to hold you to this. The Seahawks are making the playoffs in 2024. Anyway, best of luck to you, as you guys, I'm sure, are already well dug in on your process, getting your Senior Bowl roster and stuff together for the 2025 draft cycle. Best of luck to you and your staff as you guys look to have another record-breaking season next year.
Well, appreciate it, guys. Enjoy those beautiful Seattle. Enjoy a beautiful Seattle summer, man. I miss going up there in July for camp. But have a great summer, guys.
You too. Thanks, Jim.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to follow Rob at Rob Rang. You can subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we return on Thursday, we'll have some post-open OTA takeaways from the VMAC second open session for the Seahawks coming up tomorrow. We'll be breaking it all down on a live episode from Renton. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.